So let's look at the topics that we're going to cover today. We're going to start off looking at the SIE itself. What is it? I think made mention in some of the advertising for this WebEx that it was going to be the biggest thing since the introduction of the Series 1 back in 1956. Now, that might be a little bit of hyperbole, but I don't think it's that much of an exaggeration. I think as we'll see as we go on through the material, that this is going to make a lot of big changes, and I think changes that are going to be for the better in the way that examinations are given by FINRA. Why is it being proposed? We'll talk a little bit about that, and then go on to looking at this overall restructuring of FINRA exams. Now, this restructuring, the first step is going to be the introduction of the SIE, and then restructuring of what I'll call the registered representative level exams. There's also been conversation around doing a restructuring of principal level exams as well, but the first step here is going to be the registered rep level exams. Then we'll look at the content of the SIE. Now, let's keep in mind here that when we look at the content, we're really looking at the outline that was put out a number of months ago. Nothing has been finalized yet. All of this needs to go to the SEC, so there's a period of time, and there'll be comment periods, of course, as well, for that content outline to finally solidify. But we'll talk generally speaking about what type of content is envisioned for the SIE. And then, of course, most importantly, how can your firm benefit from this? What is this going to mean to you and your firm? And as I mentioned earlier, I think there's going to be a lot of benefits going forward from this new restructuring of the FINRA exams. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing here at STC to get ready to work with you on this new restructuring of FINRA exams and really help you to benefit as much as possible from this new environment that's going to be kicking off hopefully sometime early in 2018. So we'll start off here looking at what is this SIE. Well, from our perspective here, this is really the centerpiece of the FINRA exam restructuring. The idea is to reduce the number of exams that are currently out there. We've got a situation now where there's a total of about 41 exams in the securities industry, and FINRA has over 25 exams, depending on how you want to count them. But they've got more than 25 exams they're currently responsible for. And I think the thinking is here that there are just too many exams. It's a very unwieldy process, and so we can probably make it a little bit more efficient. The key here with the SIE is that it's going to become the centerpiece in that it's going to be a prerequisite for all of the remaining registered rep registrations. And we'll look at this, of course, in more detail. The next thing we want to look at here is the topics, and we talked about this in the content outline. Generally speaking, here's the idea. For those of you who maybe have taken more than one examination, I'm sure you've seen that there's overlap. In other words, the Series 6, for example, well, probably 90% of what's on the Series 6 is also on the Series 7. The Series 22, of course, is a subset of that. The Series 79 has a lot of information on it outside of simply investment banking, but a lot of general information on it that's going to be repeated in different exams. What are those shared items? What is it that's shared across these exams? Well, pretty much all of them talk about the structure of the industry, looking at exchanges, look at over-the-counter markets, things of that nature. The regulatory agencies, you always have to talk about those. So talk about the SEC, talk about FINRA, talk about the MSRB, a little bit about Blue Sky, perhaps. Not in great detail, and the detail, of course, would vary from exam to exam, but the general concept of who the regulators are, that it started off with the 33 Act, went under the 34 Act, so on and so forth. That's something that gets repeated across exams. Basic economics, right? So if any of you have sat for one of these exams, looking at the Federal Reserve, things of that nature, GDP, inflation, those types of concepts are covered across exams. Basic product knowledge. So what is a stock? Okay, it's representing ownership in a company, it's equity, pays dividends, look at the dividend yield, things of that nature. So the basic products, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and so on and so forth, well, they get mentioned in a lot of these different tests. Prohibited practices, things like money laundering, insider trading, and professional conduct. Don't take advantage of widows and orphans. Okay, so these basic concepts, these basic topics are covered in a lot of different exams. And I think the idea is, why don't we remove all those, the idea from FINRA's perspective, why don't we remove all that information and put it into one exam? That's the SIE. And of course, the biggest change here is that the SIE will be open to anyone. In other words, that sponsorship by a member firm will not be required. I'm sure, as all of you know, Currently, if you're going to take a FINRA exam, you have to be sponsored by a FINRA member firm. But the SIE will not require that sponsorship. So anyone, a college student, a career changer, someone working in India perhaps, who's interested in getting into working in some back office operations or IT operations in Bangalore for a U.S. securities firm, might be interested in taking this, they'll be able to take that. It's open to anyone. The non-affiliates are going to register via a U-10 form is currently the thinking here. And this is no different from an individual who simply wants to become an investment advisor, representative, and takes the Series 65. They do not have to be sponsored by a firm. Anyone can take the Series 65, and you would register via the U-10. This is also true of certain NFA exams as well. Another change we know from the past and currently, if I leave the industry and I'm out of the industry for more than 2 years, then I'm going to have to get recertified. In other words, I have to take the test again, unless I can convince somebody in Rockville to waive that requirement for me. And so if I go back into the industry, I hope that anyone who might be listening from FINRA will give me that waiver. But outside of the waiver, 2 years and you're out. Well, the SIE, currently the thinking is we're going to extend that to 4 years. So it'll be valid for 4 years. So I might take the SIE coming out of college. I don't initially go into the industry, but 2 years later, I get hired. That SIE will still be valid. 3 years later, that's fine. But after 4 years, then you would need to retest on the SIE. Okay, so there's just a little bit of background there on what the SIE is and how it's going to be structured. Why is FINRA proposing the SIE? Well, from an outside perspective, okay, the biggest thing is going to be reducing costs. So let's think about that. If you've got 25 exams, that means you have to have 25 different test writing committees. And a lot of you might not be familiar with the sausage-making process that is creating a FINRA exam. I think people erroneously feel that FINRA writes the tests. And that's not true. Certainly FINRA is responsible for it, and they make sure that the questions are fair and hopefully grammatically correct and things of that nature. But the question writing really begins with volunteers, who are people like most of you, working for member firms, and they will come and attend periodic meetings where they will write questions, review questions. And so it's their input, their very important input, looking from the industry perspective on what kind of knowledge should an individual have before they are let loose on the unsuspecting public. The situation then, we have to hold these meetings. Where are we going to hold it? Well, that's not convenient for a lot of people, and so what do we have to do? We have to get them out to the meeting. We've got to put them up in a hotel. We have to feed them, because these people are doing this, out of the goodness of their heart. They are volunteers, so we can't expect them to pay for their travel and so on and so forth. Well, if you've got 25 different exams, imagine how many of these meetings you have to put on, okay? So you're going to reduce cost if you consolidate that, all right? Now, all this information that's covered on the SIE, that currently we've got people writing the same questions on the Series 6, we've got people writing questions on the Series 7, the Series 22, 79, you name it. It's really not very, very efficient. And so the idea here from FINRA's perspective is let's have fewer items that we need to maintain here, okay? And that's overall is going to reduce costs and make it a more efficient and effective process. At the same time, let's eliminate some of the exams that very few people wind up taking. And so in any given year, you're just going to have a handful of people who are taking the Series 42 or 62 or 72. These are all limited representatives. You can only sell options. You can only sell corporates. You can only sell government securities. Very few people do that anymore. Most of them just going to go straight for the Series 7 or perhaps the Series 6, depending on their function. The order processing assistant, the Series 11. A number of years back, 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more popular than it is now. Today, there are very few people who are taking the Series 11. You're going to get your assistant to take the Series 6, take the Series 7, take the 99, whatever else it might be, rather than taking the Series 11, which is very limited. And the first set of exams there, the 17, 37, and 38, these are exams taken by individuals from the UK or from Canada who've taken some exams in their country and now want to register in the US. And the determination is that they'll be able to waive the SIE portion. We'll no longer need to have those exams, and these individuals will probably just wind up taking a top-off exam. So the SIE will be satisfied by whatever basic requirement they might have in their own jurisdictions. And the other thing it does, it opens it up and increases the number of candidates. So it generates revenues, right? So the SIE will not require sponsorship, as we mentioned before. And so you're going to get kids coming out of college. You're going to get people who are thinking about changing careers. It's going to be available worldwide. I think it had been mentioned somebody in India, somebody in China, somebody in the Philippines might be interested in taking this FINRA exam. It's not going to allow them to do anything. I think it's an important thing to keep in mind as we go through talking about the SIE here. You're not going to be allowed with the SIE to sell securities. You're not going to be able to function in any way. It's a whole separate exam, but that exam is then a stepping stone to what we'll talk about next, the top-off exams that do allow you to function in a particular capacity in the securities industry. So let's just look at this here pictorially. We start off with the SIE. I referred to it earlier as the centerpiece, and it sure is. The SIE is there in the middle. Anyone can take it, but it doesn't qualify you to do anything. It is the Seinfeld of exams, okay? So you're not qualified. You're not allowed to sell securities. You're not allowed to do anything in the securities industry. However, you have to pass this SIE exam before you can then take the top off. So somebody working in the mutual fund industry who currently would take the Series 6, they would need to take the SIE and then the Series 6 top-off. Somebody who works in the securities industry, broker-dealer, wants to have a general securities registration, take the SIE and then the Series 7 top-off. And so what we see here are the 8 exams, the registered rep level exams as I referred to them earlier, that are going to remain. All of them will require the SIE initially, and then these existing exams will then be top-off exams. So we have the Series 6, as we mentioned, mutual funds, variable annuities typically, the 7 general securities rep, 57 for equity traders. Recently, that was a consolidation between the 55 and 56. Now we just have one exam there, so another way that FINRA has been streamlining their process. Series 22, which is one of those limited representatives, but the people who are exclusively selling limited partnerships and things of that nature, so-called direct participation programs, DPPs. The 79 for investment bankers, 86, 87 for analysts, the 82, which is for private placements, and then the Series 99 for our back office people, operations professionals. Okay, all those exams will still be out there, but the SIE will become a prerequisite. So in looking at the top-off exams, let's start off first with the SIE. The SIE standalone test will have between 75 and 100 questions. It has not been determined yet exactly the number of questions that will be in the SIE, but 75 to 100 questions is our understanding right now. Now, if we took an exam and removed from that exam all of the topics and content that we mentioned earlier will be on the SIE, what's left over would be in the top-off exam. Now, this isn't going to be question for question, but there's the general idea. We've consolidated all the basic information about products, about the basis of regulation in the industry, how the industry works, and now we're going to focus in on the meat of that exam, shall we say. The total number of questions for the SIE plus the top-off will be similar to the existing exams. Okay, so for example, I take my SIE, 100 questions. I then take the Series 7 top-off. Let's say it's going to be 150 questions. The General Securities Representative exam currently is 250 questions. So in theory, this is how it's going to play out. We don't know, once again, will there be 75 or 100 questions in the SIE? Will it be exactly 150 questions in the Series 7 top-off? But the thinking here is that there's not going to be any difference. So there's really not too much, as far as people are saying, now we've got to take 2 exams. Let's look at a situation where the person is not going to take the SIE prior to being hired. You're hiring somebody new, and you want them to be Series 7 registered. Well, they're going to be able to schedule, current thinking, the SIE and the Series 7 on the same day. And they're going to wind up taking 250 questions. Currently, when you take the Series 7, you've got 225 question sessions, 2 separate tests that you're taking, given 6 hours to do so. So once again, while this is still a work in progress as far as how many questions will be in the SIE versus a particular top-off exam, it's really not going to have much of an impact to somebody who's sitting down and taking it all in one sitting. The top-off exams are going to keep their existing names. So that'll make things easier for everybody, right? So now when I'm talking about the Series 7 exam, a couple of years out from now, what am I going to be talking? I'm going to be talking about the top-off exam, because everything's based off the SIE, and then I take one or more top-offs depending what function I need to fulfill within my firm. Now, one thing is that, a bit of speculation here, but I think reasonable. The top-off exams could become more challenging in the future, because now the test writing committees, rather than having to write all these questions about the basics, they're going to be focusing in more on, well, maybe there's been a new development. There's a new product that's been developed out there. Let's drill down into that. Maybe there's going to be some issues surrounding exchange-traded funds. Let's start developing some questions on that. All right, so the SIE is really seen as being a fairly static exam. It's not going to change much over time. A stock is a stock and a bond is a bond. However, if you're going to go out and sell securities, such as you can in the Series 7, we might want to drill down a little bit more, and even more than is currently drilled down on the current Series 7 exam. Just a piece of speculation. It'll probably take a little bit of time, but I think another benefit might be that the exam can become a little bit more relevant, perhaps, to individuals by drilling down a little more deeply into some of these topics. So the big question now is, how is this going to affect me? How is this going to affect my firm? Well, it's going to provide firms with an opportunity to look at a lot of different types of models for how they're going to hire staff going forward, and also perhaps the onboarding process that firms use when they're hiring new staff. For example, you might have a situation where a firm says, before you apply for one of our jobs, why don't you take the SIE? So requesting applicants to take and pass the Essentials exam prior to making a job application. This is, I think, the way that a lot of firms, not all firms, because of course firms differ, right? But a lot of firms are probably going to be looking at this. Because let's look at the situation currently. I'm going to go out and hire 100 people out of college. I don't really know, although they said in the interview this is what they want to do since they were 5 years old, is to sell securities. Okay, that may or may not be true, or to work in operations or whatever other function we're hiring them for. We don't really know. Are they just simply looking for a job? All right. So there's the first part. I mean, how dedicated are they to getting into this industry? You're going to get a better gauge of who these people are, and also, do they have some basic knowledge about the securities industry? The other side is that these people have shown that they have the ability to study for and pass an exam. So in some firms, you go out and hire 100 people, you pay for them on your payroll for 2 months, and then you find out that 30% of them were not able to pass the exam. Really not fair to the firm, and really not fair to those people either. And so wouldn't it be nice if people already self-selected, to use an insurance term, but not in a pejorative way, self-selected in a positive way. They've demonstrated they have an interest in the industry, they've taken the time to study for this exam, and they've passed it on their own, which means they'll probably do well on a future exam. Not guaranteed, but certainly better than someone who's simply coming in with no preparation or background whatsoever. It might also be used with interns. We might ask of interns, take the Essentials exam, demonstrate to us that you're interested in this industry. The other thing that we might do as well is we might have our interns take the Essentials exam once they've come into work with us for the summer or whatever period of time. Okay? We can do this with new hires as well. So as soon as somebody gets hired in the firm, regardless of what their function is going to be, right, why don't we take the SIE? Okay, now we're on the same page, so we can hire people to work in IT, and those people are going to be able to have more fulsome conversations with people on the business line, because now they understand the basics of the business. Oh, I see why we have to have these information barriers. I see why we have to construct this system in a particular way, because it was covered in the SIE, some of these large issues about insider trading, about money laundering, things of that nature. So, once again, we might make it a prerequisite. I could see a situation in the future where the job posting is going to say SIE preferred. Or we might have a policy where everybody who gets hired by our firm, we're going to have them take the SIE. And what does that do? Well, it creates a larger pool of potential new registered persons. So now, when we have a need for someone in a particular area, and we've identified a candidate, all that candidate need do is to take the top-off exam. And stepping back, well, gee, why don't we just, when this becomes available, why don't we have all of our staff take it? Okay, now, of course, there's costs involved, and of course, I have a vested interest in you people all taking the SIE. All right, so we'll step back for a second here. But why not? Think of how many people there are in your organization who are not required to be registered, but would benefit tremendously from a basic course that covered the basics of the industry. Wouldn't that improve things? And now maybe not everybody, but probably a large number of people, administrative, operations, in IT, in a variety of different areas. Now, there's no liability here because they're not going to be required to take continuing education. There's no annual assessment because they're not registered persons. But they've got this basic SIE background, and in future, should they need to be registered, all they need to do is take the top-off exam. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here. Okay, and lastly, what are we here at STC doing to prepare for the SIE? Well, we're already working on the SIE and the separate top-off course materials. Of course, as I said, the final outline won't be available for some time now. It was originally thought that it would be out in 2016. We're coming near the end of 2016, but I would certainly imagine that if not by the end of this year, early next year, we'll see the proposal that will go into the rule filing that'll go to the SEC. Now, I mention that process because we anticipate the exam launch in early 2018. Now, first quarter of 2018 was the goal that FINRA had set. That may be aggressive. It may not be. The sooner the better as far as I'm concerned, and as far as we're concerned here at STC, and probably for many of you as well. But if we step back, there's going to be a lot of things that have to happen between now and then. The rule filings, and this will be combined in a number of different rule filings that FINRA is going to be putting out there to the SEC. SEC is going to go through all this, comment on it. They've got to sign off on this whole concept of anybody can take the SIE. Once that process has been gone through, then FINRA is actually going to have to create the exams, create the top-offs. And of course, they're doing work on that now, I would imagine. Right? But there's still going to be some work left to do. Nonetheless, feel fairly comfortable saying sometime in early 2018, first half of 2018, we should start seeing the SIE and some of the separate top-offs becoming available. And so what we're doing here at STC is we're starting to create those materials, think about how we're going to put it all together, how we're going to separate out the SIE material from what will become the new Series 7, which is the Series 7 top-off. We do a number of courses for a number of different firms for summer interns, as well as training programs for new members at firms, professionals who do not require licensing. So we're talking about them about how it might be structured. As I mentioned before, the summer interns, two different ways you might approach this. One might be you might request summer interns to take the SIE prior to applying. But more likely, you're going to hire a summer intern, and you'll have some things for them to do, but I know from my past experience working at different firms, you're sometimes thinking about, well, gee, what could I do to really benefit this person? They've done some nice work for us here, but say, especially if it's an unpaid internship, what can we do for them? And so one thing you might do is to put them through an SIE training program at your company while they work there over the summer. And then when they come back after the summer of their junior year and now they're seniors, say, you know what, that person was really, everybody really got along with them. They seem to be really good workers, knowledgeable, and they've got their SIE. We hire them now, and all we have to do is give them their top off. So another thing to think about there, and it's something that we certainly are talking to many of our clients about, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it as well, is how you might set up a training program for summer interns or for any of your staff who don't necessarily require licensing. Another thing I want to talk about is our college program. Some of you might not be familiar with this, But Dave Snyder, who heads up our marketing efforts here at STC, has really done an incredible job here, so that we currently have about 45 colleges and universities around the country who are offering a Series 7 based course, 3-credit college course. And, some of the schools, my daughter currently going to the University of Delaware, that's one of the schools that we have, Purdue, a number of other schools out there. We've been doing a lot, very exciting, historically black universities and colleges, a number of firms interested in their diversity hiring. And so these firms have stepped up to sponsor these schools. Basically, the way it works is we've got a number of firms out there. They'll pay a relatively small fee they'll donate a relatively small fee, I should say, to the college or university, which then is used to get the program set up, offset those costs. And then we'll work with the professors at that school, set them up with all the materials that they need to teach a course which is based on the Series 7 exam. Now, it's not going to be quite as grueling as somebody who's actually studying to pass the Series 7, and it won't be as concentrated because you've got the whole semester to talk about it. We give the professors, of course, the latitude to talk about different issues and digress from just the straight Series 7 material. But we've gotten a lot of great feedback, not just from the professors, but also from the students, especially those students who've gotten hired. So we've had situations where 9 people in the class applied for jobs, they all got hired. Had another one, there were 11 people applied, 9 of them got hired. Because what we do is all the firms that are participating in this program, we will provide them, given that the students have allowed us to do this, and most of them are more than willing to, we send the resumes of all the students who successfully passed this course in their college to all of the firms who have sponsored even one college. What a lot of the firms have done is, we have a lot of alums working here at the firm, and we tend to recruit out of a particular college or university, or several colleges or universities in our area. We just set up a new operations center outside of the one of the major financial hubs in the United States, and we're trying to figure out how we can recruit people who are knowledgeable about the industry. So that's the whole idea with the college program, which we just launched a few years ago. We've been doing it for a number of years with Bryant College up in Rhode Island, but we really just over the last 3 years, as I said, Dave Snyder has really put the pedal to the metal on this one, and we're very happy about the work that we're doing, and it's been very satisfying as well. I've been fortunate enough to work with Dave on some of the aspects of the program. What we currently have are 2 courses. One is a 3-credit course, and this is really pretty closely based on the Series 7. And there's a 1-credit course, which, if you could think of it, it's an awful lot like what the SIE is going to be. So what we're planning on doing is that once the SIE becomes available, we'll go out to all of our college partners and say, okay, the 3-credit course is going to be the SIE. Your students will study for the SIE. They'll take the SIE and pass it. You can make that their midterm. And then the next part of the class will be the top-off before they take their final exam. Obviously, the students cannot take the top-off unless they're sponsored by a member firm. However, they will be able to take the SIE. In addition to that, and we think this is going to be very popular at a lot of different schools, a 1-credit course which is simply teaching the SIE. Now, this is going to be taught we're not teaching the courses, we create the materials, the university professors are teaching the courses, but we see a lot of potential for this 1-credit course, just based on the SIE, where the student can then go out and actually take the exam. So what a great course for a college student who's a senior, who's studying IT, who's studying marketing, who's studying business, finance, is interested in getting in the industry. Take the 1-credit course, do your SIE, and now go out and start applying to companies. And the companies, of course, are going to look at your resume and say, well, I've got 2 people here. They seem pretty similar on paper. One of them's got the SIE. Okay? Not necessarily a final deciding factor, but certainly a leg up for somebody who wants to get into the industry. So we're really excited about the college program. We've had great success with that, and we expect that to expand considerably afterwards. And I think this is along the lines of what FINRA has been saying as well, that how can we get out there and educate people about the existence of this SIE, right? Now, over time, of course, if it says SIE required, people are going to catch on pretty quickly. But one of the ways that we're educating people on it is through the college programs that we've put together here. And, of course, we're at 45 now. We're going to see, I think, tremendous expansion of that, especially when the one credit course comes out. We do presentations for, Dave does presentations for organizations of college professors and deans around the country several times a year. And then, of course, creating a shortened training time for new hires. As I mentioned earlier, you might hire people in your firm and you're paying them a salary for 2 months or more while they're training, getting up to speed. Obviously, if they don't do well in the exam, that might be a lost expense for you as a firm. But in addition to the SIE, we're also working with clients to try and reduce training costs overall. And we're looking at all of our materials. I think you're going to see some very interesting things coming out of STC over the coming months, where we're trying to rethink things and saying, what is the most efficient and effective way for people to study to pass these exams? Currently, of course, we have a situation which is fairly traditional. I think you'll see most of our competitors using the similar type of methods with the textbooks and so on and so forth, a textbook-based approach. But we've been rethinking this, and as I said, I think you're going to see some very exciting things coming from STC over the next few months and few years as we look to find ways to reduce your costs and reduce the employee-related costs for firms overall. Okay, I said I was going to talk for about a half an hour here, and I think I've been good to my word. So I appreciate your attention, but there's been a number of questions here that have been asked, and also, once again, keep in mind that you can ask questions by typing in the lower right-hand corner in the chat box. But let me start off by answering a few questions first.